Hello everybody. For this video, we're going to talk about Act 3 of M Butterfly, the end of the play, finally. So, we left off in Act 2 when Song is sent to Paris to live with Gallimard. Um, Gallimard, he lost his job at being in China as a diplomat. Um, But then it says, so basically from like the late 60s to the late 80s, Gallimard gets a job as a courier, it says, carrying around some kind of important government documents. And then, eventually he ends up making copies of them and giving those to Song so Song can use it to give to the Chinese government so Song can still, go on being a spy. And they basically live together. Gallimard leaves his wife, and they basically live together in Paris for like 20 years or something. And then eventually they get caught, and that's how we end up with Scene 1 of Act 3, where we're in a courtroom, and the judge is, asking Song, I think the question that, I've asked before, and that I think I think David Henry Hwang was asking, and I think we've been trying to figure out this whole play. So the judge says on page 61, "Did Monsieur Gallimard know you were a man?" saying to Song. Um, there's some other responses, and then going on page 61, Song eventually says, "Well, Your Honor, it was my job to make him think I was a woman, and chew on this. It wasn't all that hard. See, my mother had been a prostitute along the Bunt River before the Revolution, and I think it's fair to say she learned a few things about Western men, so I borrowed her knowledge in service to my country." So I thought that was an interesting detail they put in there that Song's mother was a prostitute who, had Western men as clients. So it's a weird kind of thing where I don't know, maybe the exploitation of Song's mother by these Western men, and then after that, Song, would go on to, trick Gallimard and kind of take revenge in a way. I think there is an element of revenge to the thing here. Like I think M Butterfly is partly trying to revenge what happened in Madame Butterfly. Um, as we'll see in scene 3, Song ends up being, the cad, the bounder, the womanizer who is cruel to someone who just loves them unconditionally, as at least until the end, Gallimard does with Song. But anyway, I think that's an interesting line. Song saying it wasn't all that hard to fool Gallimard, and I think that why it wasn't all that hard has to go back to what we've been saying about stereotypes and how Gallimard can't think outside of them. Okay, so Song says it really well here, so I don't want to say too much. I want to read from page 62. So this is Song still trying to answer the judge's question of, did Gallimard know that you were a man? So Song goes on to say, I'm just going to read this part on page 62. She says, "The West thinks of itself as masculine, big guns, big industry, big money. So the East is feminine, weak, delicate, poor, but good at art and full of inscrutable wisdom, the feminine mystique. Her mouth says no, but her eyes say yes. The West believes the East deep down wants to be dominated because a woman can't think for herself." The judge: "What does this have to do with my question?" Song: "You expect Oriental countries to submit to your guns, and you expect Oriental women to submit to your men. That's why you say they make the best wives." Judge: "But why would that make it possible for you to fool Monsieur Gallimard? Please get to the point." Song: "One, because when he finally met his fantasy woman, he wanted more than anything to believe that she was in fact a woman. And second, I am an Oriental, and being an Oriental, I could never be completely a man." So this is, yeah, the most direct way Song answers the question of, did Gallimard know that you were a man? And I think it goes back to the stuff that we've been saying the whole time. So the one thing I want to point out here, at the beginning when Song says the West thinks of itself as masculine, big guns, big industry, big money. So I think I hinted at this in the last video, but the interesting thing here is the alignment between all the stereotypes about the West and all the stereotypes about men. How those all kind of go together in terms of whatever, strong, dominating, aggressive, those things, and then East being linked to feminine, weak, delicate, poor, but good at art, like Song says here. So I'm gonna talk about this more in another video I'm gonna do soon, but I think part of what we see here is yeah the linking of these categories, you know, where like the by linking men to the West, the claim is that like both of those are better, right? That those are supposed to be the better part in this stereotype, and linking the East to the feminine to make those appear like lower, you know. So it's yeah. I just think that's an interesting way that they kind of link these stereotypes and show us how they all work to justify all the other stereotypes. You know how all these things kind of collude ultimately it's here to justify like colonialism, right? Because like Song says, that Westerners believe the East wants to be dominated. So it all comes back to like colonialism and how Gallimard was using these stereotypes to justify the American invasion in Vietnam, and all those things. Okay, now I want to go back to this other quote. Um, where so this is Song's response to how was it possible for you to fool Gallimard? One, because when he finally met his fantasy woman, he wanted more than anything to believe that she was in fact a woman. I think that part links back to what we've been saying about art. They use the word fantasy in this quote, but what is the like the fantasy that Gallimard is obsessed with? It's the fantasy of Madame Butterfly, right? It's the fantasy that he's been fed through that artwork specifically, and that's been reinforced by the other things in the culture. But I think that part speaks to art and what's going on there. And then going back to the quote, and second, I'm an Oriental, and being an Oriental, I can never be completely a man. And I think that's the part that speaks more to stereotypes, right? That's where Song is saying he was so convinced of these stereotypes that just because of what I looked like and what I was wearing, he couldn't help but place me in a certain category. So I think that's a really great quote from Song on page 62 that connects to both of the main things we've been talking about. That Gallimard can be fooled by Song because he is all in on this fantasy propagated by Madame Butterfly, and because he so completely believes in the stereotypes that once Song starts acting passive and weak and delicate, and one Song wears a kimono, and just by being Asian, that Gallimard thinks the stereotypes have to be correct, and kind of categorizes Song in that way. Okay, so there's that. Um, I think it's interesting at the top of page 63. Once this is Gallimard now seeing Song dressed like a man, and Gallimard says that Song is the type that prowls around discos with a gold medallion stinking of garlic, so little like my butterfly. So I think now we're kind of seeing Song as like the con man, right? And I don't know, Song did take advantage of Gallimard. Song was deceitful and tricked him, for a very long time. Um, so I think what we see here is a transformation where at the beginning, Gallimard wants to see himself as Pinkerton from Madame Butterfly and wants to see Song as Butterfly, calls Song Butterfly the whole play. But now we see Song morphing into the con man, the one who's cruel, the one who's doing the torturing and stuff like that. Like on page 64, Song says, then again, maybe I'm just playing with you. How can you tell? So we really see Song starting to be kind of mean to Gallimard here. Gallimard says also on page 64, why do you see me? Why do you treat me so cruelly? So I think there's one other quote. Yeah, it's later on page 68. Gallimard says, "The man I loved was a cad, a bounder," and that's the exact language that they've been using about Pinkerton the whole time, saying that he's a cad and a bounder, a foreign devil, like a womanizer who's just trying to take advantage of a woman. Um, and basically now Gallimard's saying that he's fallen in love with a cad, a bounder, right? So this is now putting him in the position of Butterfly and Song in the position of Pinkerton. So we have a kind of reversal of roles and the stereotypes and stuff here. Um, and then eventually Song strips, right, to the point where he's actually totally naked on stage, I guess, is how this would happen in stage. So Gallimard, has to actually look the truth in the face. And this brings about a change in him. It seems to break the spell that he was under of even though Song was saying, I'm a man and all these things, Gallimard still seemed like, somehow in his fantasy world, But this seems to really kind of break the spell. After this, if you notice, Gallimard becomes he starts being mean to Song now, you know? His dialogue is much longer and Song is trying to like fight back but can't really. Um I kind of wonder if Song here is like disappointed that Gallimard just like is not interested in him anymore. Um I think like because then once Gallimar like starts laughing and try to tell Song to go away and he doesn't care about him anymore and all this kind of stuff. Song comes up to him, and is like rubbing his hand across his cheek and he's like, "Look, this is the same skin you've always loved. I'm still the same. You still loved me, don't you? Don't you love me?" And I feel like there's part. I don't know exactly what to do with this, but I feel like there's a sense here that Song is kind of hoping that Gallimard will just accept, that he's been in, a relationship with a man this whole time and that he liked it and that he's loved the man the whole time. Like, I feel like there's something from Song here where Song would like to them to just still be in a relationship, but now just be open about it. Um, Gallimard is unable to even consider that, right? So I think that's another way that Gallimard is so committed to these stereotypes and these, identity categories and stuff. That in addition to seeing himself as Western and a man, he can't let go of seeing himself as straight either. He can't accept like, well, maybe he would want to be in a gay relationship. He seemed to like Song the whole time. He was into it. But Gallimard goes on to say, when all I loved was the lie, a perfect lie. So that's Gallimard's response, is that all that he loved was the lie. And I think Gallimard saying that goes back again to all things we've been saying about stereotypes and art, because that's the lie, right? I think that's kind of synonymous with the fantasy that they were talking about earlier. Gallimard says on page 66, "I'm a man who loved a woman created by a man. Everything else simply falls short." That's just a good line. I don't know what else to say about it, really. On page 67, Gallimard says, "Tonight I finally learned to tell fantasy from reality, and knowing the difference, I choose fantasy." So I think that's kind of a great line, and maybe one that helps us understand the ending as we move towards just the last couple of pages here. So Gallimard says, "I finally learned to tell fantasy from reality." So this, maybe this could have been the moment where he finally realized that all the stereotypes he's been relying on his whole life are bullshit and that they've never been real, and that he didn't need to feel bad about himself when he wasn't this ultra masculine man, and that um, that the things that he thought he wanted were kind of made up and perpetuated by art and by magazines and by his friends at school, and all of this kind of stuff. So, but yeah, but then he says, "And knowing the difference, I choose fantasy." So instead of going into reality, which, the reality is that stereotypes don't apply and you can't always fit people into easy categories and people are individuals who will surprise you and that kind of stuff. He instead chooses fantasy, goes all in on fantasy. And I think this is why, in the next scene, we see Galvar become Butterfly. This is the part, so on page 68 is the part I was talking about before, where Galmar says, "My mistakes were simple and absolute. The man I loved was a cad, a bounder. He deserved nothing but a kick in the behind, and instead I gave him all my love." And if you go back to the beginning of the play, it's exactly how Gallimard describes what happens to Song and Madame Butterfly. That, she falls in love with a cad, a bounder, all those words. They mean like womanizer. So now that's Gallimard. So instead of realizing that this whole thing was dumb to begin with and that he was foolish and naive to think that art would sync up with life in that kind of way, he instead becomes Butterfly. He says here, and Song becomes Pinkerton, right? He says on page 68, "Love warped my judgment, blinded my eyes, rearranged the very lines of my face until I could look in the mirror and see nothing but a woman." And then after this, he puts on the kimono and he puts on the wig that Song was wearing earlier. And I think it's interesting. He says, "Love warped my judgment," but love for what? He says on the previous page that all that he loved was the lie. So it's like he was so in love with this fantasy from Madame Butterfly that that's the thing that he was remains committed to, and the thing that then requires him to become Butterfly. So then now he's wearing the kimono, and it sets up for the final scene of Madame Butterfly, which is a suicide scene. Um, so that's what we get here. It ends, at least Gallimard's last line. He says, "My name is Rene Gallimard, also known as Madame Butterfly." Um, and then he plunges the knife into his body. Song, who stands as a man staring at Gallimard, he smokes a cigarette. The smoke filters up through the lights. Two words leave his lips: butterfly, butterfly, and to play. Um, it's a good ending. I really think this is an interesting play. I hope you guys enjoyed it at least a little bit. But yeah, so that line, my name is Rene Gallimard, also known as Madame Butterfly. So there you go. At the end of it, he has to become Butterfly. So why does he have to become Butterfly? Because we already established before that Song has actually been Pinkerton this whole time. Song has been the con man taking advantage, right? And Gallimard was kind of the person hopelessly in love. So if Song is Pinkerton in Gallimard's mind, that means he must be Butterfly, right? Because the other option, like I was saying, would be to return to reality and to give up on this fantasy, to realize that Madame Butterfly was a bullshit opera written by an Italian in 1904 who knew nothing about Japan, and that he's in China and he's not in Japan anyway, and he's French and he's not American, and that his life was never really anything like Madame Butterfly. Instead of accepting that, he stays committed, he becomes Butterfly, and he has to kill himself. All right, so where does this leave us in terms of our essay, in terms of the messages that we've been tracking throughout the play? So, what does the play show us about stereotypes? Let's start with that one. So, I think it's Gallimard's belief in these stereotypes that allow him to be tricked and that ultimately lead to his suicide. So, what does that say? I mean, I think number one, before that, I think the play shows us that these stereotypes are not true. Like when Gallimard uses them to make these military predictions, and then he's totally wrong and gets fired for it. I think we see with that this stuff was never true, was not going to be true, and obviously once we find out that Song is tricking him the whole time, and I think I like the way that the acts are split up, where Act One is like, oh, when it ends, it's like, oh wow, they actually are fitting into the stereotypes. Maybe the play is going to tell us these stereotypes are true, you know. But then the whole thing gets flipped on its head, of course. So I think so. Number one, if we were going to write about stereotypes here, I would want you to be really specific about like how exactly stereotypes are harmful according to the play. So I would definitely include the thing about how stereotypes can be used to justify, like military action and colonialism, the way that Gallimard's telling his military bosses that um, that the Vietnamese just want to be dominated actually, and that if you show that you're the strongest, well, they'll just give up. So I think that's one thing that you might want to look into. It also tells us about where stereotypes come from in terms of art and the magazines and his friend Mark in the play and all that. So if you're going to write about stereotypes, you could think about where do they come from, how are they harmful, uh, yeah, and then just the fact that Gallimard believing in them leads to his downfall in the play. And then the other option I gave you about art, I think that one thing we see from the play, if we're asking, if we're, I think we'd be looking at the role of Madame Butterfly in this play, and thinking about like how does that work? Why is it there? And I think it shows us that art sets expectations. Number one, that Gallimard, what he expects an affair with a woman in China to be like once he finds himself in that position, he can't help but see it in terms of the his favorite opera. So I think it shows us how art sets expectations, and also how art is one of the things that's used to justify colonialism and all that stuff, because the art perpetuates the stereotypes that are then used to justify something like the invasion of Vietnam in the play. So yeah, I don't want to say too much on this because I want you guys, to form your own ideas. But you want to make sure you use a lot of quotes, right? I've been trying to give you the page numbers for the specific quotes that I'm using to back up what I'm saying, because I want you guys to be analyzing a lot of quotes when you're writing about the play. And yeah, I would try to answer that one of those questions. What is the play trying to show us about stereotypes? Where do stereotypes come from? Why are they harmful? Or what is the play showing us about the effect that art can have on people? Uh, yeah. So that's the play. Again, hope you enjoyed it. I'll probably have one more video coming for you this week, and we'll talk more soon. Thanks, everybody.